Meeting started in about a minute here.
Kate McKenna.
You want me to get
Oh,
on ad tech real quick? You got internet?
Oh,
You got
he's
internet?
out for a
I can
family
get on
issue.
the ad tech and pull
Is
it
that
up real fast.
until Thursday?
If you wanted me to.
Not that he's told.
Is what? How much? Are you looking for an average or?
Hey.
We're going to talk about it, but all right, we'll call this study session of Monday, July 24th to order. Everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, first of all, I just wanted to say I'm not usually in this seat. Richard usually is, and he is away to deal with some family things. We send our thoughts to him, and Commissioner Stanley is also out. She is not feeling well, so we wish her a speedy recovery as we get started here. So with that, I will turn it over for a roll call.
Yes, good evening, Commissioner Werner,
Here.
Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Stanley, Commissioner Treadwell,
Here.
Commissioner Colbert,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Shamrow,
Here.
and Mayor Lewis.
All right. Start with announcements from the city manager.
I have none this evening.
All right, from the city clerk.
Yes, just one meeting to announce for this week, the week of July 24th. The Historic Districts Commission is meeting on Thursday, July 27th. That'll be at noon in the committee room, which is on the second floor of the Governmental Center. We're recruiting for a number of board and committee seats for folks who want to volunteer and help power city government. Those include seats on the Local Officers Compensation Commission, Human Rights Commission, Board of Zoning Appeals, Board of Review, Coast Guard City Committee, Planning Commission, and finally Parks and Recreation Commission. And anyone interested in serving, as always, is encouraged to contact the city clerk's office. And then just one community update, and that is that this month, July, is National Parks and Recreation Month, and that's a campaign to promote and build strong, vibrant, and resilient communities through the power of parks and recreation, and to support more than 160,000 full-time parks and recreation professionals. We thank ours, and more can be learned by visiting the city's recreation directory on the city's website at traversitymi.gov, where there's all sorts of handy information regarding the parks we have available. And lastly, I just want to remind everyone sitting up here, if you speak tonight, please make sure to speak into the microphone so folks listening here and elsewhere can hear what you say. And that's all that I've got.
Well, and I just wanted to say excellent job so far. There's been, if people don't follow our social media for the city, there have been some great posts this month highlighting all the different parks. I think even longtime residents don't realize how many we have. It's been a really great job from your team putting that out there and kind of getting some good snapshots of them and reminding people. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so for this study session, we have two topics just to let the public know. In case you're here, really eager to talk about one in particular, we'll take a moment of public comment after each item just so people can feel like they're addressing the topics as they're relevant. So to kick us off, we will be discussing the report from the primary transport ad hoc, which was myself, Commissioner Wilson, and Mayor Lewis. And obviously he's not here right now, so I'll be kicking that off to just kind of remind everyone we had an update, I think, about a month ago from the ad hoc, but this originally started as investigating EMS transport, but part of the discussion then went into the facilities. So the ad hoc ended up sort of doing a two-pronged tackle of what could be done with the facilities. We looked at gender neutral at first and realized that that just was going to be an expensive bandage on something that needed a bigger fix, as well as the actual original intent of looking at the EMS transport. So you've got we all were sent the rather large summary of it all, but to kind of start us off and lead us through it, I'm going to hand it over to Chief Tuller.
Right, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Shamro. And I appreciate the opportunity to be at the commission table here tonight on this important topic. Before I get started, on my left, I just want to introduce some members of my command staff that I brought along. On my far left is Captain Chris Jackson, Suppression Crew 1. Captain Keith Fritz, he is our fire marshal and affiliated with Inspection and Prevention. And on my right is Suppression Captain Steve Ball with Crew 3. And Steve's been integral in reviewing, I guess, the numbers side of this project and working along with Mayor Lewis on this project over these many months. This was all initiated quite a while ago. There was a request made from a motion by then Commissioner Brian McGilvery and seconded by then Commissioner Richard Lewis to set aside some funds, around $38,000, to commission a third-party study to look at the question, should Traverse City Fire become the primary EMS transport agency within the city limits of Traverse City? That started before COVID. The consultant that was hired was Tridata Corporation. Dr. Harold Cohen was the principal and who ended up meeting with us. It kind of got started not through any intention, but COVID happened, and that slowed us down by many months. But we were able to finally, in December of 2020, arrive at a report, which has been part of the record for quite a while. When that report came in front of the commission, then an ad hoc committee was formed, of which you mentioned, which yourself, Mayor Pro Tem Shamro, Ashley Walter was on that at the beginning, and then Mayor Lewis and Ashley Walter left to take a position with Grand Traverse County, and Commissioner Mark Willison joined us, and we appreciate all the effort there. Several meetings were held, a few were canceled here and there, but several meetings were held to look at that issue, which the fire department has been raising that question over many, many years that I can speak to since I've been here. But we got into the nuts and bolts and the finer details of that, and along the way, it was also brought up that our fire departments, our fire stations, station number 1 downtown at 500 West Front Street, which was constructed in 1974, and then station 2 up at 1313 East number 8 Street, constructed in 1968, were really not set up to accommodate other than male firefighters at that time. And so that's why like a little sidebar was generated to look at the fire stations, of which there was a study done, and then a recommendation that came from that was to look at the possibility of basically knocking down both stations and building 2 new ones. And both of those topics are covered in Mayor Lewis's report, which is part of tonight's packet, dated July 10. Tonight, I'd like to, I'm here, and my command staff here is to talk about and answer any questions that the commission may have regarding the primary EMS transport project. I know there's information in here regarding the fire station project. It was my intent that going forward from today, that depending on action next Monday night at the regular meeting, that the city commission would find it appropriate to motion and pass effort to have ballot language put on this fall's primary to support the financing of Traverse City Fire becoming the primary transport within the city of Traverse City. And then secondarily, the fire station project would be something that we would look at in the fall of 2024. And I recommend that based upon the fact that the city and the county have engaged with a vendor out of Grand Rapids, Tower Pankster, in this effort to look at all of the city and all the county facilities and how they're being utilized, and recommendations for improvement or remodeling or change of use and all that. And our 2 fire station project is right in the middle of that, and we've not really received the final word on that, although we have preliminary figures as illustrated in the packet tonight by Mayor Lewis, which have been developed with discussions with Tower Pankster and also with Tim Lodge of City Engineering. And so those figures are fairly valid. However, it was my intent and hope that this would be like a 2-year, 2-step type of effort. And with that, unless there's any direct questions of me at this time, I'd like to turn it back over to the commission. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for that update, Chief. And just to kind of add just a hair more to that, because as Chief mentioned, I've been on the ad hoc the whole time, that is the discussion is kind of, it was two-tiered. That information is still going to be relevant, but we're talking about the approaches, and that's kind of what we landed on here. One of the notes to make was that we have numbers in front of us. Some of them are rather large. A lot of this is the upfront cost, and that was especially something that when I spoke to Mayor Lewis before he had to leave town, that he wanted to emphasize as well, that this is to get the transport up and running. It won't be a large figure like that every year or even frequently throughout the duration of the potential millage. So I just wanted to emphasize that as we're having this conversation, as well as talk about that was discussed with how the facilities are currently constructed, how that would be feasible. Obviously, Chief's weighing in here, and the staff is up here, which I should note that we don't always do this, but we kind of have been talking about this as maybe a better way when we're having discussions that involve an entire department or certain staff people, instead of having you all stand up there at the public comment podium, to invite you as part of our conversation up here. So welcome also, I should have said that at the top. But yeah, so I just wanted to emphasize that part of the report. And Commissioner Wilson, also, you're on it. Did you have anything you wanted to add or any highlights? Okay, great. So at this point, we will open it up to commissioners. Do you have questions, especially as kind of was touched on by Chief Tuller? Do we, we're really looking at the EMS the EMS transport recommendation being brought forward for a vote next week. So this is a chance to dig into those numbers a little bit more, any of the process. As I mentioned, Commissioner Wilson and I and Mayor Lewis have been neck deep in this for several months with staff, so there's a lot of stuff that we are very familiar with, but this might be a first glance for a lot of you, so we want to open it up for any kind of questioning from top to bottom. Anyone? Tim, go ahead.
Well, to me, this was the main question years ago when it first got kicked off, and to me, it's still the main question is why? Like, why would we be primary transport at the cost of $1 million per year ongoing? So it's citizens get to pay $1 million so that our guys and women can provide primary transport, but where is the justification for that? Like, how many lives are saved? If they're going to go to the ballot box and say yes or no, there's got to be some good arguments for it. And I'd like to see that for next Monday, some good arguments for why we should even put it on the ballot.
And Chief, I know, and we definitely can get more in depth for some more answers with that, but Chief, I know you, one of the conversations we've had a lot is response time and what that translates to. So if you all wanted to comment on that now, we can certainly prepare more in-depth numbers to go with that.
Before we start, I just wanted to say I had the same question, but I wasn't here at this table a year ago when this first came up, so I would appreciate that kind of information as well.
And to your point, Commissioner Colbert, and to the point that Chief Tuller made, this is really, some of that data goes back to the original TriData study, and there's been a lot of information in a lot of places over a lot of years now. So I'll definitely make a note to kind of talk about consolidating some of those tables.
I've read it in the paper.
Yeah, there you go. And in the meantime, though, Chief, if you wanted to, or any of the guys up here, you all have been, we've got a few of you up here. You all had showed up to some of the meetings. Other guys from the department showed up too. So I know a lot of you are well versed. So whoever wants to field that.
Sure, and that's a very good question, Commissioner Werner. Thank you. So why? How come? Why now? The need has been there for more than a few years, and I guess I can best speak to it in a couple different ways, and we can definitely provide more detailed information to the commission before next Monday. But let me proceed here for a little bit and try not to monopolize the whole event here. As was born out of the TriData study, and as a reminder for those that weren't on the commission at that time, many of our departments, fire departments within Grand Traverse County, there's 9 separate fire departments within the county that have ambulance services, have upgraded to being their own primary ALS transport agency based on the need within their jurisdiction. Peninsula Township, Long Lake Township, Green Lake Township, East Bay Township, Blair Township, and others have agreements with each other or side agreements with mobile medical response, but the need is out there in the county. We have a certain amount of our population within the county that is based on the data I pulled from the recent housing study that was presented. Overall, senior households 55 and older constitute over half, 52% of all households within Grand Traverse County. So why does that affect the city? Because the need out there in the county keeps those agencies busy constantly, and therefore we also experience that, I guess, busyness. Last year we ran almost 3,400 emergency calls within the city. 75% of them were medical. Within the city, as a sidebar from the housing report, in 2022, household heads, this is household heads, between ages of 65 and 74 within Traverse City comprise the largest share of households, 20% by age. Household heads between ages of 55 and 64 represent the next largest share, 18.5%, followed by those age 75 and older at 15.6. So household heads age 55 and older comprise over half at 53% of all households within the area, and area is Traverse City. This is the sub-report under the main housing report. So why do I bring that up? And I'm slowly approaching that demographic myself, and I'm in part of that. The reason is those are the people that make up proportionally somewhat of the larger share of our response emergency calls, 911 calls, slips and trips and falls and cardiac and all those other things, which more often than not result in critical care needs, which also translate the need for advanced life support, the heart monitor, the heart drugs, those kinds of things. So the need is basically based on demographics out there, and I can go on and on about age and numbers and things like that, and I can put together a report to get to the commission here, before next Monday night, and plenty of time to review that. But also, too, I see the need as being that if Traverse City Fire has its own service, those employees, those people that work for us, for the city, are our employees, and we have control over them. Our training is second to none. Our continuity of care that we provide, we are going on these calls with either a rescue that can transport or an engine, that's a paramedic unit. But right now, when we respond, more times than not, we're stabilizing the patient and then we're handing them off to a third-party agency who then bills for that service. We are there, the citizens are paying the freight, as I term it, for our services already. We have the training, we have the equipment. Yep, the first year startup is pretty scary, but that is, that will result in Traverse City, the citizens, owning their own EMS transport agency and serving the citizens in Traverse City with the best care possible. We can stabilize them, we can transport, we can get to Munson, we can get them to more definitive care in quick order. Our response times have shown, we went back through ESO, and that's why Captain Fritz is here. He is my ESO software guru. He provided me a figure. So since we started using ESO in 2018?
Yeah.
Okay, 2018, and he's a man of few words, but in 2018, our average response time to any call within the city, because we have 2 stations and because our people work 24-hour shifts and are committed to the city, our average response time was 3 minutes and 56 seconds to all calls.
That's medical calls only. I didn't
Medical
do
calls only. See, that's why I brought them. medical calls only. We've learned through our training that time is muscle, minutes count, especially in these days of higher traffic volumes and different things that we've taken with other efforts within the city government to, I guess, slow traffic or calm traffic. I was looking at some other data from the software report that shows actually our dispatch to arrival times are slowly increasing, and I attribute that to the recent bridge projects we still have going, kind of, and last year, and, you know, the increase in traffic, you know, throughout the summer months, we have to reconfigure our routes. And we're looking at that again for next year when the Parkway is going to be a project that MDOT's going to undertake. So I guess to sum it up, Commissioner Warner, the need is because the need's been there. We're just, you know, my job as fire chief and that of the department is to plan ahead. If we get a positive vote next Monday and then in November from the citizens, it's going to take us some time to ramp up. It's going to take us a year or 2 years to get there. And that's what I'm anticipating. The need is here, and it's going to be even more at those times.
And Nate, you look like you were going to ask something or put something in. Did you have something else to add?
No, Chief totally covered. I was just going to reframe the question, but he
He
saw
picked
right
up what I was putting
needed.
down.
Yep.
Yeah, and if I could add in, there's nothing against MMR, but they are a third-party agency, so, you know, just the way the service is designed, they could be coming from wherever, outside the county. So if it's what we call a priority 2 or priority 3, which could be your child's arm breaks, it could be 15 minutes or more. They're not going to be going emergent to those calls, so we'll be there within minutes, but it still takes, you know, we can stabilize it and we can do certain things there, but it still takes them getting to the hospital. So with that, there's a lot of times that we're waiting for a fair amount of time while they come there just to transport the patient when we're there. So, I mean, that's a big deal.
And
So-
Captain Ball, going a little bit into this, and yourself or anybody else up there, again, one of those things where we've been in the weeds for a bit on this, but I think to some people at home, maybe even some people up here who haven't been part of the initial discussions, really briefly take us through, because I think some people might be sitting at home and saying, well, if you're already responding and we already have bus or ambulances, what's the problem here? And so can you kind of explain how that works with the handoffs and the billing?
Yeah,
briefly?
and Chief kind of mentioned that we call that the continuity of care. So when there's a dispatch for any kind of emergency, we get dispatched, we show up, and that's within minutes. And depending on the type of emergency, we're getting an MMR transport unit to show up. So we have all the drugs, the capabilities to do everything on scene, but it still takes that loading the patient and moving them to the hospital. So we're there quite often for I mean, sometimes it's awkward that we're there for 10, 15 minutes before we can do anything further. With that, you know, there's a lot of things that could be started as far as for strokes, heart attacks, all those different things that are very serious. We're there waiting, so there is time. You know, and it's nothing against them. It's just how that system is set up. Where if we had our own transport, we would grab them and go right away. So not only that, but there is a cost to this, but there is also revenue that's generated. Now we can bill for that as well. Another benefit that's not often talked about is we can do what we call soft billing, which we do now, which as a resident, that average bill may be $2,000 if you need to go to the hospital for you know, various reasons. But if we soft bill, we would only charge the insurance company. So it would actually be a benefit to that citizen where it may only be a few $100s, whatever the insurance company would charge. So that is a big benefit to the citizen, because right now, as a third-party system, if they show up, you're going to get a bill, and it could be, you know, $500 just for them to show up. So there's some advantages. The faster response time is huge. Also for us, our safety, it's extra firefighters that we would have in the system. So it actually lowers overtime cost, which is huge. We had, you know, roughly 350,000, I think, and we average in overtime a year. So with those extra additional firefighters, that would diminish greatly. Also, on call volumes for fires, we would have more firefighters that would respond. So there's some other benefits that way. And then also, like Chief mentioned, we can control it. You know, when it comes to revenue, we're talking about, even at soft costs, we're figuring at least $500,000, probably more than that, but that was a conservative figure that we would gain, so.
And we can speak to our payer base.
Traverse City's unique, as we all know, right? So we have a lot of folks that visit Traverse City, so those folks would still get billed the full amount, right? But it's the residents, we have, 15,000 that are here, but we have, 100,000 in any given day. So that's kind of unique for the fire service. So we actually respond about, we'll be on pace for about 3,500 calls this year, which is a fair amount of calls for a community that's only 15,000. So a lot of it is people using our resources, and quite frankly, now we don't have a way to bill for that or generate that. They're coming to use our services, us in this case, and we have no way to capture that.
Go ahead, Mark.
That was basically the question I was going to get to and bring to recommended improvements number 4, considering billing non-city residents. And then within the database, do we have a way to estimate how much revenue we'd be capturing by that?
So we've had a couple third-party billing agencies kind of give us a forecast. So if we soft bill, which is that only charging the residents the insurance, that's a hard one to kind of nail down. But we're figuring at least $1 million. That's a very conservative number. If we were to bill the full amount, we're looking at $750,000 to $1 million a year. So it would almost cover, not quite cover, but almost cover the cost of doing this. And that is, you are correct, this is the first year cost, because there is, we have to buy 2 more ambulances, so through time, that's going to diminish, so.
Go ahead, Mitch.
Yeah, Chief, you mentioned that some of the surrounding townships or joint entities operate their own ambulance service. Some contract through MMR. Are there, in your conversations, which I hope you are having just to see how things are working across the region, have there been other concerns about response times with MMR, or is that more unique to the city as an area of greater population density and traffic volumes?
Yeah, there have been concerns. However, with them not present in the room and other agencies in the room, I really don't want to go down that path. I know that they serve also Garfield Township through an agreement, and there have been challenges there expressed to me by their leadership. However, like I mentioned, I don't want to seem inappropriate by airing out other agencies' concerns, but there is a concern there.
Okay.
They also, I'll just add, they do transfers as well. So again, a normal thing for a third-party agency, but they'll take, if there's a patient at Munson that needs to go to University of Michigan, they'll take those. So when that happens, they may not have staffed up for that. So when those calls come, that takes a rig out of service, so now they're one down. So they have their own challenges that are unique. I think what Chief said, ultimately, we're just better to serve ourselves, and we're better to control it as a city. So we can control our service, we can control our people. Most of our guys, they come in, we're a 25-year commitment, so we know the folks, we're committed to the city and the residents, so.
Go ahead, Linda.
I have a question about staffing. I know it's been difficult to find firefighters. Do you worry about that with this additional need? And this is just for my own benefit. You mentioned something about this means we'll have extra firefighters. EMS people are not firefighters. Are firefighters EMS people?
Well, let me tackle that, Cap.
Go for it.
I'm
They are.
gonna hold the Cap
Are
back.
they?
a little
Are
bit.
you?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. So all of our personnel are cross-trained. They to apply, you have to have what's called State of Michigan Firefighter 1 and 2, and either an EMT basic or an EMT paramedic license. And everybody that works at the fire department, most are paramedics. Through the collective bargaining process, the last one, we were able to have 2 pathways to come on board with the City of Traverse City Fire Department. One is either you have firefighter 1 and 2 and an EMT basic license, and then that person would be on probation for 3 years, and within that time, once they complete their firefighter probation, then they would engage with the paramedic program, and the city would help pay for that cost to train them up to paramedics, because with an advanced life support system, paramedic level service, we need those paramedics. Or you can come on board with a firefighter 1 and 2 certification and an EMT paramedic license and do a couple of things with a local medical control and start practicing right away. But yeah, we're all cross-trained. That all started back in the mid-90s when the emergency room doctors at Munson Hospital approached the fire department leadership at that time and city management and said, hey, Traverse City Fire Department needs to become paramedic level. care providers out there. Yep. And also, too, one thing I was going to speak to that Captain brought up, and non-emergency transfers. This whole proposal that is before you only considers us responding to 911 emergency calls and being able to transport from there to the hospital. Non-emergency transfers happen every day in this town and in the area, and those involve scheduling or calling 911 for a unit to respond, non-emergent, to pick a person up, take them to the hospital. There's no emergency, they just need to be seen. The assisted living care facility or some other facility has no means to transport them, so they need an ambulance. Or it's a scheduled service. Okay, tomorrow we're going to pick a patient up from an assisted living center, take them to the hospital, wait till the procedure's done, or at Copper Ridge or any of the other facilities, and then a return. So there's a bill taking the patient to and a bill taking the patient from back home. That's not what we're proposing here at all. We want to be on standby to respond to the citizens and their need during an emergency.
I have one other staffing question, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am.
What was it? It was, so if we already have 9 independent providers in this area, how are we going to keep people from jumping from one department to another as salaries are better in another area? Are you all working in concert to say, here's what we're paying so that we don't have to fight amongst ourselves?
That's a good question. And what I can say is we've been successful in hiring people along the way. We have one more vacancy to fill. The change in the collective bargaining agreement helped us to a certain extent because we did hire 2 personnel and one more that we're bringing on in August or September that are EMT basics. It's a challenge living in this area. And I think everybody gets that if you live and work here. The only thing I can speak to is the chiefs have an association. We meet every month. We all get along really well. We help each other out in emergencies all the time. We cross jurisdictional lines all the time. But as far as how much do you pay and how much do you pay, it's kind of a buyer's market right now. And there have been some personnel that have left for other departments, not so much us, but other departments, and we've been able to acquire a few personnel from other departments. We are, aside from Grand Traverse Metro, which covers 3 townships, we're second busiest in the county, but we also have a lot to offer regarding training, education, responsibilities, and I like to think we take, I'm not saying other departments don't take care of their people, but we really concentrate on taking care of our personnel, whether it be peer support, critical incident stress debriefing, any of those things, or opening up educational opportunities. We have a very robust training budget, which thankfully the city commission through the city management team have been allowing us to have, and that is, I guess, a lever or a carrot, if you will. Once our personnel are with us for about a year or so, then we start figuring out what specialties they might like to engage in, whether it's hazardous materials or technical rescue and all these other things, and we'll send them to school and we'll get them trained. And there's not a lot of other departments that have the ability to do that. But, living and working downtown for a busy department and not knowing what the day's going to bring, but being trained and have the equipment and the ability to take that on, I think is really attractive. And, we really try to emphasize that. And we've been fairly fortunate along the way because it is a struggle. All emergency services and all the professional trades are suffering right now, but we've been by fits and starts. And also, I need to recognize our recruiter, Jason, who's working with HR right now. He's cold calling people, and we're getting applicants. So there's a way to get there, and we've been fairly successful over the past number of months to do that.
Thank you.
And should this pass, we would turn up the throttle on that effort. And there are anecdotal information passed to me, there are other personnel out there waiting to see what happens with this project that would really love to come to Traverse City and wear the patch, but they want to be sure of what's going to happen. So, thank you.
So we're only second busiest? Who's first busiest?
It'll be Grand Traverse Metro, but they cover 3 townships. Acme, East Bay, Garfield, and they run more volume than we do, and they have 5 stations, but they cover a lot more square miles too, so.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and just as a side note, I was privileged to be over at the Firehouse 1 or Station 1 when they were going through one of the trainings for some recruits, and it was very impressive to see what the people put out when they're there to do it, and the effort they put into it, and the standards that our guys have for the people who would make the cut. So it's not just showing up and with your EMT license and wanting to be a firefighter. They have a really good process. So that does make it difficult here. One question I did have, and we talked about this at one point, and if you need to wait till next week to put it out, but what if we had our 5th firefighter finally hired, what would our staffing level be right now by number, not broken up at all, and what would it be if this were to pass and we were to go into EMS transport?
Right, if this were to be successful in the past, we would hire 9+1, so it'd be 9 more personnel to work on, a suppression shift as firefighter EMTs and eventually medics or firefighter medics, and then 1 person to manage that whole EMS side of the house. I'm missing 1 captain tonight, Larry Mueller, who you've seen in a lot of the meetings. Yeah, he could not be here tonight, and he sends his regards, but it would be an EMS captain to run that whole division.
Yeah, and currently, how many captains do we have?
We have 4.
Yes, I just
We got
wanted
3
people
here
to be
and
kind of aware of,
1 not here.
yeah,
Yep.
where
Mayor
we're at.
Pro Tem, if I may,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that at least I'm very clear on this, because I thought where we left the conversation last, that yes, we need 9+1, but we already had the authorization for the 3. So I thought what we're hiring is 6 additional +1. I just want to make
Right.
sure we're talking same numbers here.
Well, we discussed that, I don't know if it's the last ad hoc or the
Yeah.
one before that, the 9+1 versus the 6+1. And the 6 or the 9 would be either 2 or 3 per shift. And if we were successful with the 9+1, then that would give us the ability to send maybe a person off on vacation and then a person off to out-of-town training, and then not engage in the overtime process. We would still be able to staff our frontline units appropriately.
So between the action last year, if I know the timing right, plus potentially this, are we talking a total of 12+1 that's going to be hired?
No, it'd be 9+1.
Yeah,
Including last year's action and this is 9+1?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure that,
Because we anticipate being busy enough to fully staff 2 frontline ambulances and have a 3rd one in reserve, and be able to staff that on a backup basis. Because it's many times throughout the week, we'll get 2 or 3 calls within a 20-minute time period, and we're scattering units all over town. And if we apply to the state to be the full-time EMS transport agency within a city, we have to do that on a 24/7 basis. It's not like, oh, we can't do that because we have people out. We have to be able to represent, and so that's how we got to that number.
Just to be clear, we could do it with the 6. However, that would cause overtime anytime anybody took PTO time. So, we decided to present it as what it should be. That way, we won't have to incur the overtime costs that we've been, like you said, around $350,000 a year.
well, and I think it's important to note that, I don't know if this is what you're experiencing over in fire, but at least my understanding on the police side, especially with where I came from, is this newer generation of public servants or public safety personnel, they're not as interested in the overtime as some of your more senior folks. A lot of times the overtime falls to your most senior folks because either they've got other things going, but most of the time they want that time with their families and all that other stuff. So, when you're talking about personnel levels, we do have to look at it with this newer generation in mind, because they're not the workaholics that, myself, prior generations and others, and then that contributes to the burnout of our more senior folks as well.
Yeah, actually, that's a real good point. I will say we have, after overtime, when it doesn't get filled, we have a mandatory process, because we have to fill the shifts.
Right.
And, you know, as of right now, which is, I've been here, 21 years, I've never seen anything like it. We're already over 150 shifts this year already, mandatory
150 mandatory shifts.
shifts, so it is an issue.
Yeah, and just to clarify a little bit on the point that was just made, that I would turn it back to you all, but from what I've gathered, both from the conversation I think we all had last year at the budgets when we authorized the extra firefighters already, and some of the conversations we've had in this ad hoc, it's not even just by age or demographic. It's 150 mandatory hours, $350,000 worth of overtime every year is a lot for everybody. And so I just wanted to make that clear, that I think that it wouldn't matter if we found more senior people and brought them in, or had only a young force. It would still be an issue of there's just not enough people for the hours to allow them to work in a reasonable way.
One additional comment is we are going about 10% increase every year as well, call volume. So take that in consideration. I mean, that's every year we're clicking up about 10%, so.
And that was a little bit of how we landed on the 9+1, correct,
Correct.
instead of the 6, because anticipating that, getting that all geared up over the next few years that would take, and thank you for the reminder point, because I meant to cover that, that gearing up for what it would take to run this, and with the responses and the calls that we get already, that we could do for 6, but in a couple of years, we'd be ramping it up anyways. Anticipating, I should say, not guaranteed. Were there other questions from the commission right now? Go ahead, Tim.
Just for next Monday, if there could be another set of eyes on this, I'll call it a spreadsheet, this table of numbers, because like the 350,000 of overtime saved, is there concurrence on that number? Should that number be in here somehow so that it's included in the net? And anything else, just a double, triple check of what's here.
Yeah, absolutely. We did do a review with finance after the last meeting because there were a couple points that we had a little bit of healthy disagreement. It wasn't like a bad thing. It was just, making sure we had some clarification. So we'll do another look at that, at least what I'm hearing from the commission. If anybody's hearing differently, you'd like to see some ballot language come back on this staffing issue for the August 7th meeting. Because as I understand, Clerk Marentat, this is the last meeting that we could approve ballot language for November. Is that correct?
Or
we
very
have-
close to it, unless there was a special meeting.
Unless there's a
Yeah.
special meeting.
Right.
This is the last regular meeting. Okay.
And, go ahead,
Well, just,
Yes.
it's fine to have ballot language next week, but
you need some data.
I still don't see why. I hear there's frustration, I hear there's awkwardness waiting around, but how many lives have we lost the past few years? I mean, I know that gets awkward to talk about, but if that's what we're talking about, let's talk about it. How many lives were lost because our guys, gals weren't the ones transporting? How many actual lives will be saved in the next decade because we are? I feel like we're dancing around that, saying, well, we have better training than they do, these other things. But at some point, like, what is it? It's got to be more than just frustration.
I think that's a hard thing to quantify, though.
Well, if
How
I could
many
really
people we're
quickly jump in,
saving?
because we had this conversation when we were talking about your training a few years ago, and to Tim's point, I think, too, the better question might be how many lives saved, so that's something that you all with
Sure, how
data
many
could do
lives
with analyzing the time, response times and things, because we have that conversation all the time when we talk about the number of fire calls have gone down. Well, we don't cut the fire department or get rid of an engine because the fires have gone down. It's because you are doing more preventative measures.
Right.
And that needs to be factored in. You don't just look at calls and responses. So I think if I could help, or if I could offer clarification, Tim, and tell me if I'm wrong, that you're kind of asking how many lives have been saved, or how does that response time make a difference if it was to full transport versus having to wait and things?
Yeah, I mean, we as humans don't like to talk about it, but in business, in the world, we put a value on a life. There's a dollar figure that's put on a life. We don't like to talk about it, but at some point it needs talked about.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Mitch.
and kind of going off of that point, call me perhaps being old-fashioned despite literally being the youngest person behind the desk, but I grew up thinking of fire departments as having the primary responsibility of putting out fires, but it has, and it's increasingly becoming not just okay, you put out the fires, and not just you work on fire prevention, building inspections and the like, but it's primarily medical care and medical response, which could seem sensible for a third-party entity, MMR or somebody else, or even Munson, if Munson decided to be operating ambulance services themselves.
Again, they used to.
Yes. That's what I was saying. To be providing that service, but we're increasingly getting to a point where fire departments get that, so I would be interested in seeing the justification. I can get that it makes sense for, if you respond to the scene and you can stabilize the person and you have the ambulance, why not just drive the person from where they are on Front Street, past the fire station, to Munson?
Yeah, it gets to be a little more complex. You know, again, they have their own challenges. You know, I wouldn't talk bad about them, but we have a contract with them currently, and they're not meeting that contract by time. And again, it's mostly because they're having issues as well. You know, we can't force them to meet it, right? So we can control it internally, and that's one
And
reason why
if
we're.
it is being staffed in-house by the fire department,
Correct.
then we can have a lot more direct control over something like this.
Right.
Yeah, I would say I would request based on a reminder on that, because I, again, was familiar, so I didn't go over the packet as much. Maybe if we could get some of the call response data that we have had in the ad hocs presented for next week, as well as I would be interested, you know, it's all floating around there, and we had some of these discussions during the ad hoc, in even just a quick list of who's gone over to their own transport and when. So I know that's been a relatively recent trend, if you will, but it hasn't been a slow trickle, I don't believe. I think it's been relatively recent in a chunk of years. So I think that could be interesting, or good data for us to look at as well, that this isn't, well, one group decided and 10 years later another one did, and 10, you know, that this has kind of been a cluster, and that's some information, and maybe Chief could, having talked to the other chiefs, kind of comment on that with that data next week.
And that would be the agencies within our county, correct?
I think the county would be good data for it, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we can provide that, sure.
Mayor Pro Tem, if I can throw one more question out there that may or may not be helpful to some of the conversation. You know, Captain Ball brought up, you know, some of the discussions we've had about MMR and maybe not meeting expectations. And one thing that I wonder, as maybe part of this discussion on next week, do we know, like, has MMR articulated what it would take for them to meet that expectation? I know, Chief, you've been talking with them, and I think you've had other staff involved in that. Has there been an acknowledgement that they're not meeting expectations, and have they articulated what they would need to do in order to improve the performance?
Right, in the report, it lists some information under my report that's attached to Mayor Lewis's report of quarterly meetings that I have with MMR. I just met with them last week, all the way up until last week's meeting, but in June, they did meet by 91% their target of being able to respond to priority one calls under, I think it's 9 minutes, 90% of the time. Up to then, they were deficient, and I want to say it was June 24th when we had the meeting. They represented it. I said, hey, I've not gotten June's report. I got it, and they were a point over their 90% minimum. However, they did at every meeting mention to me that, you know, they're working to bolster their roster, their staff as well. They have, you know, this person going through school, this person transferring into there, these kinds of things. They're experiencing some of the challenges that we're having here locally, but MMR is, you know, I don't know how many counties they're involved in. They're really strong down south, and they're based out of Saginaw. And locally, they provided services to Whitewater Township, Elk Rapids, the village of Elk Rapids, and also Garfield Township. But their plan going forward is to hire more people and train more people and then fill those holes. Now, as far as how many ambulances they're going to add to the responsibility of covering Grand Traverse County, if I recall correctly, they try to have 4 staffed with an echo unit. An echo unit is a paramedic and like a Suburban, something that can't transport. I believe that's our goal. I can confirm that, but they haven't come out with like a definitive plan. We're going to put on 2 more rigs. We're going to do this, but they do explain to me that they're having people leave and come and go, and they're hiring, and which is a lot of the challenges everybody's having right now.
And just to clarify, Chief, and I apologize that
Sure.
this data is on page 19 of ours, but I know at the last ad hoc, we had talked about getting something more recent than March, and so that's what I was kind of referring to, and I apologize. And if it's not available, that I understand that we only get it in clumps, but that would give us the first full half of the year to look at then.
Yep.
And for next week, I would like a little more clarity as far as how the billing could potentially work and what options are.
Mhm.
I like the idea of soft billing and that being essentially another benefit to living in the city, but I'd be curious if there's administrative issues with a disparate billing system and what happens when you have somebody that either their insurance or the person is unwilling or unable to pay the bill.
Yeah, I can answer that. We
No.
we wouldn't collect,
Okay.
so.
Right. Yeah, there's a protocol. We have aligned ourselves with a third-party billing agent for probably the last year and a half, and they have an extensive protocol, and it's up to the department or the municipality, but they will bring to bear any and all forces that they need to, in some instances, to collect. But we can provide that information. That's not a problem.
Okay. Just from a personal experience in a different municipality, the city of Lansing, when I ended up getting rescued by Lansing Fire, I ended up, the fire department sent me a bill, the ambulance sent me a bill, and then the hospital sent me a bill. And hospital, because Sparrow has a great relationship with MSU, I was just able to sign a form, and they could get my financial aid records and say, okay, you qualify under this program, so you're waived. And fire department was able to set up something, but then the ambulance had a third billing system, and that ended up being like $400, which for a college student is a significant chunk of change.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point, Mitch. If we could not only hear about how you all have been doing it, but maybe, again, checking with some of the other departments, the billing cycles with that a little bit, and kind of the precedent that's out there. That'd be great. Any other questions from anybody? Okay, seeing none, I think we've given you all a few things to chew on and write down, and we'll got notes here to follow up. But also, if any commissioners have any questions between now and next week, I would say email Nate and Chief Toller, and they'll be sure to make sure that those answers are covered next week as well. So because we did say we would, we'll take a moment here. If anybody has any public comment about the EMS transport, that's what we'll limit it to right now. Feel free to approach the podium. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the. Did you have?
Before we do,
Okay.
may I ask one question? Given the substance of the ask on the 7th and
Oh, sorry,
No.
it's 2 weeks, yes, sorry.
putting a ballot on the agenda is always a big decision. Would you like kind of us to assemble this all into kind of a more robust presentation that will tee up the whole discussion so that when folks are watching this or trying to learn and understand what's going on here, that we provide as much context as possibly digested into a manageable presentation?
In my notes, I have talked to them about getting Alana and Colleen together to make a nice presentation for us, so I think that would be good.
But that does not include the new fire stations, right?
No.
We're just concentrating on this.
Just
That's the right.
Now, it would probably be worth us mentioning that that's still a need that needs to be addressed to make this all work. But I think to Chief's point earlier, it's part of a larger conversation that needs to be had about facilities and other needs
Yes.
as well, so.
Thank you.
All right, excellent point. Okay, so moving gears real quick, we're going to look at the compensation study. Just to give everybody a quick overview from this side, Richard, I know, and even myself had been talking about this with staff for about a year, and it's been going on in various forms. And so this is the compensation study as presented that's kind of been done and work done over quite a few months now, 6 or more. So I'll hand it over to you, Nate, to handle
All right.
that.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation. I did provide a little additional information prior to the meeting. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it or not. My intent was kind of to walk through all that today anyway, but you have a hard copy in front of you as well if you do not have it up on your laptops. Just a few points or a request really of the commission as Christine and I walk through this is I'd like to try to get all the way to the end and then come back on some of the discussion topics that I suggest, and also obviously look at any other discussion points or topics that you all may have. Let's see, I thought there was one other thing. If not, let's go ahead and, all right. So anytime I'm working on something like this, I always like to offer up a few disclaimers because this matter is not a simple matter. It's a complex matter. It's an emotional matter. There's a lot of different things to take into account here. So first and foremost, this has been one of the things that's been on my plate that I have been consistently asked to get it done. And so what was requested prior to me getting here, and also even prior before our HR director coming back, what you have in front of you is the results of that ask. So now we're at this position where now we have to bring this to you because this was something you've asked for, and we need to talk about what's in here, but maybe what some of the other discussion points are that we need to work through. As I mentioned, for our teacher friends, we were not here when this assignment was handed out. The study was provided to you prior to the meeting, although there wasn't, and I acknowledge, a lot of context to it. And quite frankly, that's just because there's not a lot of context that we could have added that wasn't already in there. We're having this discussion tonight because, quite honestly, if this is not meeting certain expectations, I need some additional direction. Christine needs some additional direction from you all. And there is no action tonight, although if you do get a sense that, look, we'd like to see A, B, C, and D, or something else come back to the commission, if you have that tonight, great, let us know. Otherwise, we can always schedule another study session to keep this conversation going. Come on. Don't die on me now. Okay, there we go. All right. Okay, good. All right, so what we have in front of you is, and I'm just going to call it what it is. This is a very, very basic comp study. I've seen these before. They're pretty simple-ish to put together. A lot of the data is relatively available. There's also warehouses of data, if you will, out there through MML, which is where some of this gets collected. But then you also have usually a custom survey that goes out to comparable cities. A lot of the comparables from the start were cities that were kind of asked for ahead of time. When Christine and I started diving into this, there were a few questions that we had, a few other suggestions of ways to look for comparable cities that we threw out there to the consultant. They obliged and added a couple other cities. What you'll see in that is that many of our job titles, and I should have put quotes on job titles. Many of our job titles, we'll do the old Chris Farley thing, and are within market. And I think one of the things that makes this comp study a challenge is what is our market. It's hard to define that. Other things that we learned in here is that our grade and step system, which is not an uncommon system used in municipalities of all sizes, ours is very well defined. It's been working for many years. We have a very robust point and factor system. Christine, you want to maybe just explain briefly what a point factor system is rather than me butchering it?
Sure. So each job description is evaluated against 10 factors. and each of those factors have certain point systems. And so HR, the directors for the department, and sometimes the employee will go in and do a blind rating on the job description. It's not on the person, it's on the job description. And then it gives a total point system, and then we have a range for each grade. And wherever their points land is where their pay is then established.
The point of using a point factor system, well, there's a lot of reasons you use it, but when you're talking about employees, they're people. They have expectations, they have ideas of where they should be at. It helps take a little bit of the emotion out of the process, and but this process can also get very subjective because you're talking about individuals, you're talking about perceptions on duties and all that stuff, and as Christine said, you have multiple players involved in this, so it helps reduce some of the subjectivity. It's not purely objective, don't get that sense, but then ultimately you end up with a score, and that score helps you identify where you fall on the grade and step system. And then the consultant did note that there's a couple potential benefits that we may want to look at tweaking, and if I didn't make a note, if I recall, it's primarily having to do with time off,
Correct.
primarily time off related. Okay, so some of the realities that I always like to talk about things in realities, because when we're looking at a study or we're looking at making a big decision, I am not a fan of like shying away from the big things that are requiring us to have this conversation. No fault of the consultant that did this work, but for many of your key positions, particularly, many of the ones in the ACT group, which I always forget what it stands for. Help me out.
Administrative,
confidential,
Technical.
technical. Thank you. Basically, your non-bargain for employees, the non-union employees. A lot of these positions elsewhere in the state and elsewhere in the country, the market for these positions is moving more rapidly and quicker than any comp study is going to be able to keep up with. So I didn't say the words in the previous slide, but I said that this study is a snapshot, and that's what it is. It's a snapshot in time when that data happened to be placed on MML's site or that particular city filled out the survey. That's what we're looking at. There's a number of key positions right now that the city is trying to recruit for. Am I panicking of where you guys are at? Absolutely not. But you have a transition that is happening, as we talked about in my first or second meeting. Not only are you looking for a city manager, which is going to be the most important hiring decision. Sorry, Lauren, I'm biased.
That's what they always say.
Yeah, that the city commission's going to have to make here that has a big implication for where the city goes in the future and who you have guiding you. But we also have the police chief. Yes, we have there he is. Chief Richmond, interim Chief Richmond, I prefer to call him Chief Richmond, is doing a great job. Is that where that needs to go? I still think that should be a decision by somebody else, but that's a position we need to fill. The assistant city manager, whether the new city manager that comes in thinks that role should be there or that it should be functioned the same way, that is a role that needs to be filled. The finance director and treasurer, we don't need to rehash that conversation, but that has been a tough one for well over a year to get that filled. And now we have a city engineer that with tens of millions of dollars of projects going on right now, we need to find a city engineer. And I think I started to allude to this before you all, but just being completely honest here, with the level of expectations in this community and the projects and the goals and priorities of this community, this organization is concerningly thin. And when you're looking at a structure like that, and now you start to take on some of the concerns and frustrations that staff might have on pay or benefits or what have you, it's exacerbated when you're under a constant stress of meeting deadlines and what have you. And I just want to give you an example. And I'm trying to coach the staff on this a little bit, but they work in an environment that they're used to, there's no breaks, right? So I said, look guys, I'm going to be going down to lunch whoever wants to come down can come down. And yes, it was a last minute thing, but only one person felt like they had the ability to step away from their desk to go have lunch. Just being honest, this is just me, that is not a healthy environment for employees. There needs to be the ability to step away, to take a breather. There's got to be a work-life balance. All these things come into play when you're talking about compensation and also staffing. Come on. There we go. Okay, so some of the policy discussions and questions that were prompted by this study and some of the conversations with staff and conversations with Christine is what we have here in Traverse City versus other communities. And I don't want to like dive into the weeds on this, but just to give you some perspective. If I'm a community in Southeast Michigan and I'm trying to find a police chief, for example, I've got 100 communities that I can potentially go through because it's Metro Detroit. There is a density of a lot of different entities. You have a lot of very large cities. There's a much more diverse pool that you can potentially pull from other areas. You don't have that in Traverse City. So that goes to the next question. When we're looking at these roles or even others, we've got other vacancies. I don't want you to think that the ones I listed are the only ones or the most important, but we're looking for a deputy assessor, for example. Where are we recruiting from? And if you take more of the traditional look at this, again, I'll just use Metro Detroit, we're looking at, okay, who can get here within driving distance? And, people, half hour, 45 minutes to an hour is not necessarily uncommon down there. When you look at what's within a half hour, 45-minute drive from here, I mean, let's just go back to that Tower Pinkster study. And you remember the drive time radius they show? There's not a lot of density as far as similar communities to pull from or to recruit from. Again, another question, and Commissioner Werner, I threw this in specifically for you. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to build and retain the staffing levels and the professionals that we need today? Or are we trying to be ready and build this organization and the level of professionals for where the city needs to get to based on goals and priorities, but also just based on changes in expectations in the community? Again, going back to one of the first couple presentations, are we succession ready? Do we have the ability to transition from position to position with minimal interruptions? Do we have the ability to grow our own people? And I think, I'll just tell you my assessment is no, we're not right now. We're trying to get a few things teed up to try to analyze what it would take to be more ready for these succession planning changes. But right now, we're not that robust of an organization. And then the other thing that we absolutely cannot overlook, and this is for the commission, but it's also for our staff as well, is we cannot ignore total compensation. Depending on the role, depending on the collective bargaining agreement, depending on the position, the fringe benefits, if you will, can sometimes be as much as 50% to 100% of additional compensation to just the salary. Total compensation is just not dollars and cents. I can just tell you from what I've experienced and seen elsewhere, you have a very robust benefits package. It is nothing to blink an eye at. It is a very robust package. And, we've seen how that benefit package has played to your benefit in the retention of certain employees or attracting certain employees. But I think one of the other conversations that should be had is, are we still offering the right mix of benefits? Maybe it's, I'll just go to the extreme, maybe it's 100% we still want to offer as a fringe benefit, but is it the right mix of benefits? Newer generations have different priorities for benefits. In a community like this and elsewhere, more and more of the conversation, talking to a colleague of mine in a large county, childcare is a topic that constantly comes up. So again, these are just some of the things that are hitting my mind when I think through this. And the one I missed is, we know where the comparables of the market, if you will, where the market says we should be. But I think at least just from some of the sentiment that I've heard from some commissioners is, do we want to follow those trends or do we want to lead those trends? And I think that's a policy discussion that only you guys can make. That's not something that I can do as a city manager. Because as a city manager, I'm going to be looking at, okay, what does the data presented to me show? But from a policy standpoint, I need to know with where you want this organization to get to. And then I can help you figure out how to get there, right? So recommendations, the report that you received, file it, call it done. It's there. We've got some information. We know our grade and step system is still robust. It still works for us. Probably needs a little bit of some tweaks. We are recommending, and when I say we, I'm talking the HR director and I, we are recommending an update to the grade and step system, which you have in front of you. What we're doing here is we're recommending, based on where we posted the finance director, working backwards, we're recommending the addition of 2 new grades. And those 2 new grades are being recommended based on our observations from what it's going to require to recruit somebody, hopefully recruit somebody, but then also to better reflect some of the updated job descriptions and some of the responsibilities of some of our positions here. The second piece of that, well, let me back up. And so that, if the commission is in agreement, we would bring that back to you on August 7th. Hypothetically speaking, you approve that on the 7th. The immediate next step that would follow is HR would conduct a point factor review of every single position in the ACT group. So that's, what's the number again?
We have 43 positions.
43 positions. All 43 positions would be reviewed based on the updated job descriptions that were completed roughly when?
In January of this year.
In January of this year. Those have not, we haven't gone through and rescored everything, right? So we would go through, rescore every single position in that group. And that scoring process, as Christine talked about earlier, is not done in a vacuum. This is a process that's done that involves the employee, it involves the supervisor, it involves the director. In the case of the city manager's direct reports, it would involve myself. And just given some of my history, I'd want, Christine's gonna be a part of it regardless. That would take approximately 2 weeks. That is if we can keep other things from rising to the top. So 2 weeks is a very aggressive timeline, but we think it can be done. I put if needed in parentheses. I think most likely it would be needed. Once we get through that complete reclassification, it's going to give us a number of what the total change would be required. That, again, if this all went smoothly, we could have that back to you at the September 5th. Note that it's Tuesday, September 5th, City Council meeting. Lastly, the other recommendation I have is if you feel that we need to do a more robust look at all of this, if some of those policy decisions or discussions are something that are a priority of this commission, then I'm going to need some direction on what you want to see back. I know exactly where I would go if we wanted or needed something, or if you all wanted something that was more robust. I know the person that I would trust doing it, and I know the company I would trust doing it, and quite honestly, maybe I'm biased, I wouldn't trust anybody else to do it. That being said, we are ready to discuss, but I'm going to leave it back on this question. And these aren't the only things we can discuss tonight, right? If there are other topics that you want us to look at considering, if there's other questions you have for us to clarify what we just went through or what's in the study, Christine and I are prepared to walk you through anything that's on your mind. Did I miss anything?
No.
Okay. So I turn it back to you, Mayor Pro Tem.
All right, and I will turn it over to my colleagues on the commission to kick it off if you all have something at the top of mind right now. Well, if you all need another second to ponder, I would just say that Well, first question I have is, we just referred an item already to the meeting on the 7th, which I've been mistakenly saying next week over and over again. I keep forgetting the 31st is next week. It's a fifth Monday. We will not be meeting. So please don't people show up here thinking we're going to be talking about EMS transport next week. We will not be. We'll be 2 weeks from now. But I don't know, Benjamin, I know you kind of keep a log. Is the meeting on the 7th looking pretty full, or is?
It's honestly hard to say at this point.
Okay.
I mean, we've got a few things that we know that are on the radar, but
Nothing
much
like
is
the
gonna
last
come-
meeting.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Well,
So
I wouldn't
much
be
will
surprised if
come
another fuel purchase
forward in the
order.
next week. You know, another
Yeah.
week we would really know.
Okay, so I guess what, one thing I would offer up is, if there aren't a lot of questions up here, and that seems like the first recommended step of the, adding the steps to our compensation tier isn't a hot button thing, regardless of what the schedule looks like for the 7th, sounds like it would be okay to move forward with. But if that was something part of a larger conversation that you all want to have, I guess I would suggest maybe would look at it, if it ends up being a full one, give them the grace to push it out maybe 2 weeks if they need a little bit more time for that, and to prepare for a larger discussion. So I would also throw that into the question mix of what are we tackling now versus what do we want to have them dig more into and have at a future date. If we don't have a ton up front right now, we can take care of immediate needs and move those other topics for a deep dive later if anybody has any.
I was just gonna say, I think you just said what I was thinking. Yeah, my recommendation would be act on this, because then we can get started with some immediate questions and concerns that the staff has had for a while. There would be changes that would occur, but I don't want to give anybody a false notion. That doesn't mean every single position moves. It doesn't mean every single person ends up being where they think it should be, but that's why we have a point factor system that's built to look analytically at each individual updated job description. So yes, I would feel pretty strongly that if you're comfortable with that, let's get at least that part done so that we can immediately start that review process. And then if there's additional study or work that you would like to do, we could put that on one of our other future study sessions and continue the conversation.
Go ahead.
Yes,
Rich.
I would like to echo that and say that this is a very good starting point, and it definitely gives us some actionable steps for evaluating a number of specific positions. And as far as the questions that we have before us that we could be discussing, I would say that I feel that this is a fairly well done study. I could raise questions about whether Madison Heights is really a comparable city, but frankly, I am not a professional expert in this, and the people that put together this report are. I am not in a position to write and say which cities or communities I think should be best, and frankly, I think it would be getting too much into the weeds when we literally paid an outside consultant to do this work for us. Might we want a little more clarity on some things? Perhaps, but I think that will come out as we're digging through and seeing how our job descriptions and salaries for specific positions align with what this is laying out and what feedback we hear from staff and HR through the process.
Linda, did you have a finger up?
Yeah, so this is just general. It saddens me that I say over and over again, we're understaffed and underpaid. And it just goes without saying, we're understaffed and we're underpaid. And we should be a leader. Should we be a leader or a follower? We should be a leader. And our people shouldn't have to look at communities nearby and know that they could be making more there. Given housing costs, that's another piece here for retaining people. At the last meeting, we said, I don't think that's enough for city manager, let's up it, and we did. But we didn't look at any spreadsheet to see if that's possible. And so that's my question here. I want everybody to get a raise, and I want to see more people hired, but can we do that? Who's gonna show us the spreadsheet that says what we can do? practically.
Well, that's one of the challenges of being in the position that I'm in right now, because as, again, we go back to some of our earlier discussions, we're not budgeting using a 5-year or a 6-year forecast, which is what I'm used to. So essentially, yes, Traverse City's economy, its tax values, yes, it's very robust, fine. I mean, if you're up for gambling, great, but it's very hard to make long-term decisions and not have any indication of what the long-term impacts are going to be, because when we go through this exercise and we come back to you all and say, look, it's going to cost X dollars as a cumulative impact of reclassifying these positions, the other costs are going to come to your unfunded liabilities that, right now, we can give you some estimates, but we don't know. We were just talking earlier with our firefighters, fire professionals, about the staffing that they're looking at doing and the potential need for buildings. I can't tell you right now, as if we make a holistic change and we try to lead more, I can't tell you with confidence how that's going to impact our ability to build buildings or build roads or whatever other umpteen priorities that there are. And it kind of goes back to that alignment discussion we have, is there's not a unified vision here. And that, where I'm kind of starting to ramble, is it all comes back to what is the organization we're trying to build. Because if we're trying to stay status quo and just keep doing what we're doing, that's easy for us as staff to do. We've got a list of positions, we know these updated job descriptions and what have you, we're just going to keep doing that. But if the goal is to get the organization here, what it looks like underneath that might look completely different. And I don't know that you have the data to have those conversations. What we're proposing with the reclassifications is it's a step in the right direction, but I just go back to this mantra that I keep bringing up, is you guys need a much larger discussion in this community. You need to try to get more people on a more similar page versus this group thinks we should do this, and this group thinks we should do this, and this group thinks we should do this. And now we're playing whack-a-mole. And that's in part when you start taking that whack-a-mole approach on top of this, we're a very thin organization, that just exacerbates the challenges even further. So this is a one step of many, but those conversations that you're talking about, Commissioner Colbert, that's a conversation you guys need to continue to have.
Tim, did you?
Yeah. So I agree with quite a bit of what was just said by the city manager, and I agree with quite a bit of what was said by Commissioner Colbert. Absolutely, I'm in favor of being a leader and building this for tomorrow. And yeah, what I was hearing from Nate is our lack of kind of solid goals and objectives that we're working toward as a city commission and working through a city manager and city manager staff. And we never really got our act together with that in the past 2 years. And to the point of underpaid and overworked staff, yes, I agree, underpaid. Overworked, yeah, but that's all our faults because we don't set our list of priorities. You said umpteen priorities. Yeah, at some point we have to say, oh, you know what? We only get to have this many priorities, not umpteen. And these things aren't priorities, and they come off the list. And the city manager does not allow staff to spend time on those because those are not priorities. If they want to spend their own personal time on them, that's fine. But we have way too many, and that gets to part of what I think I hear you're saying about this group wants this, and this group wants that, and this group wants that. But that's our responsibility. Like, the groups, good for them. They can want what they want, and that's wonderful. But it's up to us, working through a city manager, to decide where the money's getting spent and what the goals and objectives and priorities are. And we can do better. We can. And I think that whole work-life balance that's been alluded to so many times, staff benefits from it when we do better and we eliminate things from that list of umpteen things. So they know these are the priorities, and they don't have to work so many hours. Now I'm rambling. Thanks.
I had a quick question to clarify after Commissioner Treadwell's comment of the comp cities were chosen by professionals, which is true to a point. But then I think you also said when you were doing the introduction that other cities were suggested and added and moved around. So I guess one question I have, not before the next week, but maybe in general as we continue to think on this and maybe have another study session, is did those cities actually make sense to be the ones that we comped at the end? Because that's at the heart of a lot of this. And not saying that we wouldn't adjust the pay scales based on this right now, and I agree with what we've said, and we've said that up here many a time of we don't pay well enough for what the level of professionalism we expect and where we live. But I think, some of these make a lot of sense, and some of them, are they too small or too different? And is that something that we need to look at?
Well, I can give you a start of an answer, and then yes, we can talk about it further. So anytime a comp study like this is done, they're going to look at, okay, whether comps have been used in the past. Now, Christine, I don't know if you knew this or not, she's kind of a rock star. She came up with an alternative study, not study, but strategy to look at who our comps would be. And so she came up with, I think it was 11 factors, if I recall correctly, and then she charted out communities that aligned on those different factors. Now, unfortunately, the highest number of alignment with communities was 4 of those 11 that aligned with us. So those seven.
7 was the highest.
7 was the highest. So in these factors where we did have some overlap, we did suggest those to the consultant, and I believe they were added. Is that
Yes.
correct? We did have some communities added from that. But again, that goes back to, where are we recruiting from? Because I think there's a lot of folks, and I think some of the commission is starting to allude to this, is if we're recruiting from downstate, to bring somebody up here is very different than if I'm in Brighton and I'm trying to recruit somebody from Fowlerville or something like that. You guys are blessed and you're cursed that you are this island. You are the regional hub of Northwest Michigan. You're the only metro in this region.
Or will be soon. Will be soon.
Will be soon.
Yes.
Okay. The other factor that we have to think about, and this was something I was starting to talk to some colleagues about, and I hope the staff doesn't get too excited because I don't even know how you would do this, but there are certain positions that having a municipal comparable is not going to do you any good. And I'm just going to pick on, because I'm sorry, that's the one that's the clearest example, the city engineer. Trying to recruit a city engineer in the city of Traverse City, more likely you're going to be trying to recruit from the private sector versus another community. Because again, I'm guessing, I don't know that this is fact, that many of the communities around here are not large enough to have their own city engineer. Does Traverse City justify having a city engineer? Everything that I can see with the number of projects you have, absolutely 100%. But where are you going to find that individual? Are we going to find somebody downstate that's going to want to pick up and move to Traverse City?
And
I
even
don't
if
know
we
the
are
answer
getting
to that.
somebody from downstate, there are more engineers in the private sector, even civil
Well,
engineers.
but hold on, that's a couple different things, so yeah.
But, those are some of the, that's why I'm trying to get this point across that not every position is going to be treated the same. Like we were talking about earlier, that I'm not a fan of COLA. I'm not a fan of COLA because every single position is very different. And that's where we go back to that point factor system, going through that process to look at each position individually based on the updated job description.
Okay, go ahead, Linda.
So this is, again, my naivete, having never done this before. Are we expected on the 7th to go through a list of positions? And
God, no.
Okay.
No, that's not your role.
What is our role?
We're adding 10 and
You're-
11.
We have to, so there's,
you could go through the list if you
It's like,
wanted to.
there's
No,
two
we
things that is your role.
Okay.
One of them is to approve the grade and steps.
Okay.
That's something you have to approve. At least I think that's how this city has operated in the past. A lot of times you'll find the grade and step as a part of the budget process. The other thing that we will need you to act upon is going to be, there's going to likely be a budget amendment that's going to be necessary in order to facilitate those things. It's a little uncomfortable for me to bring that forward to you at this time because I don't have that long-term forecast. It's something we're working on, but I think it's just where we're at. It's not going to be the commission's role to go in and say, well, this person should really be in this thing, this person should be over here. Well, I disagree with, that's not how that's again why we have the point factor system. That's why the process was gone through to get everybody to get those job descriptions updated. Because, I mean, we've heard of it in the private sector, scope creep, right? Well, when you've got an organization where you've got folks that have been here for a long time, their roles and responsibilities creep. And probably rightfully so because of the changes in expectations and all that for the organization. But that's why, again, they went back, updated all those job descriptions. Now we need to get those job descriptions in alignment with the grade and steps.
And so our rock star is doing the heavy lifting on that?
Yes, she would be the one that
Excellent.
would be leading all of that.
Yeah.
Now, some of it's going to be subject to what else comes up. Hopefully, we're at a good point in time. We still have some time before negotiations start, and I can't remember when open enrollment. I think we finished open enrollment.
Open enrollment's done.
Open enrollment's done, so it's a good. I think it's a good time.
It's just not me. It'll
It's-
be all the department heads. We'll be evaluating it. A lot of the work has already been done because we've had reclass requests, and we haven't pushed anything forward because the process that we have was evaluated.
Right.
And so now that it's got the thumbs up, I'm sure the department heads and the employees are going to be eager to get these evaluated, and then it's just a matter of collecting the data.
And to the conversation earlier about expectations, and again, I appreciate hearing from Commissioner Werner and others, kind of your thoughts on that, as I've been trying to encourage folks that, look, this work's still going to be there. Whether it gets done today or it gets done 2 weeks from now, it still has to get done at some point. But we have to be reasonable on what we expect. If I say, based on coming from this and with Christine's help, we say that, look, now that the commission potentially has approved this, this is not the priority. We are going to make this the priority, that you and your staff are going to make the time to get through this process so that we can do justice for our employees and get this piece of the project done. Yes, granted, there's a larger conversation we still need to have, but at least get this portion done.
So I think that's my question. Why are we waiting 2 weeks to say, yeah?
Because we're in a study
Because it's a
session.
study
Because we're in a
session.
session.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And
Now-
next week is the 5th Monday.
Yeah. So, I mean, are there things that we can do to ramp up? Yes. I mean, I'll talk with Christine tomorrow, but we can probably start putting some things on the schedule. Maybe orient people around what this process is going to look like. I would say one thing that I think I'll add is probably should be an action item. I am not overly comfortable, as I am not her boss, to do the city attorney on my own. I think it would be appropriate to have a commissioner or two be a part of that process. If you have any disagreement with that, or
No.
don't have
Well,
disagreement
I
with
don't
that.
have the
That's,
2 appointed positions on the point factor. Those are 2 separate.
Well, that's a different conversation. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
well, maybe you guys already
That's
handled that.
traditionally been picked up by the mayor and mayor pro tem.
Okay, so that is a conversation that I think we should have, because there was some additional data that or someone had asked for from the consultant. So I think we should put something on that August 7th agenda, unless you guys already handled this recently, to review that position.
I guess I would ask Benjamin really quickly about procedure on that, is if that were to be handed over and it was the will of the commission that it continue to be with mayor and mayor pro tem, could that just be something we have a discussion of while the tier or the stepped addition is on the table? Should we ask the mayor and mayor pro tem to sit down about this in that informal way we do things sometimes, or would this require a formal motion and creation?
I don't think it has to be formal. I
Okay.
think it's just if it's the consensus of the commission to handle it that way, the city attorney reports to the city commission and you set that
Yeah.
person's salary.
I think
If
we
you're
could set
comfortable
up
with that,
that
I'm-
conversation unless anybody objects. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
And then quickly, other thoughts and comments? Sorry, Linda, you asked some very good things there. It got us going in a good direction.
No, I think I had something, but it's gone.
Okay. That's why I jot things down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with what the immediate steps that we'll be taking and looking at these. As far as thoughts on some of these other questions, I know that in recent times, as part of the Light and Power Board, we've reopened some compensations with that and shifted a little bit of kind of created the grandfathered old school benefits, and then newer hires, they changed the benefit to compensation, actual pay compensation ratio a little bit. I guess I'd be curious if that's something we'd want to tackle in the future as we're talking about recruiting and looking at some positions. And again, maybe Christine, you'll go and think on this and say for ACT positions, that doesn't make any sense, or maybe that is something we need to look at as we look at our, as was mentioned, our funds that are available and the quality of people that we want and what the market is demanding for different positions out there at this time. That seems like something we might want to tackle.
Well, and just to pick on our friends in uniform over there a little bit, they're anxiously listening here. And if
I thought
we're
it was
gonna,
unusual that they stayed.
They're good. They love meetings now that they've gone to so many ad hocs.
but if we were to have a larger discussion on this, I mean, kind of what I'm imagining if there was going to be an additional study is, not necessarily for the purpose of upcoming negotiations, but really more of a look at, okay, post-pandemic 21st century, where should we be going with benefits?
Mm-hmm.
Is pension still the right thing? I don't even want to throw a bunch of different examples because I don't want to get anybody nervous, but, there's typically got to be a big give and take in some of those things. And so, like, when you look, not just in Michigan, but when you look elsewhere, the leaders in the country on what they're doing with benefits, where should we be? One thing that's come up with some of my colleagues that have been leading this stuff, when you think about maternal leave, allowing that to
Parental
include
leave.
paternal leave or parental leave as well. Are we equipped for that? I don't know the answer to that, but looking, again, more robust at, at least based on what I'm hearing from this commission is, let's keep working with what we have, but as we're having these conversations going forward over the next handful of years, where is it that we're trying to get to?
Absolutely. I remembered what I wanted to say. I see lots of staff in the audience. Are they here because they want to add anything to this
Well, we're gonna.
conversation? You're going to give them a
This is
chance?
a study session, not a
Okay,
business
good.
meeting, so we've got to do it
All
a
right,
little
good.
differently. But yes, we
Okay.
are going to be open for comments of all kinds in a minute here. One other thing I wanted to just throw out there: in a few months, the board up here will look different, one way, shape, or form. So I don't think we tackle it before then. But throwing it out there that whoever might be up here. I know that as part of City Academy that you all did a budget exercise and kind of said, here's what you have after you've paid all these obligations out and everything. And frankly, we've never done anything like that with the City Commission. And to a bit to the point that City Manager is making here, part of it is because we don't forecast. And so that should be changing as we're starting to look at budgeting with a forecast. But in the short run, as we're getting used to that, I think that could be a better conversation to be had in the future with the goal setting that tends to happen every 2 years, is to say, okay, we're going to set these goals, to Commissioner Warner's point, what's realistic to get done? What pot of money are we looking at? And how is that going to go? If we're going to give a lot of increased salary, does that mean we're not going to do, to the point was made, as many road projects? Does that mean we're not going to be able to do some of the green energy initiatives we thought we were going to do this year and have to move them to next year? That's not a right or wrong answer to anything. None of those are right, none of those are wrong, but that's something that realistically we should have more commissions should have more information in hand when we're making it, because it can be easy to want to say, sure, to $10,000 here and $50,000 there that we're adding to the budget, because it's that, though to most people at home that's not small change. To a budget of our size, it's not hugely significant, but that starts to add up. And then when we're looking at budgets and improving them, that's a bunch of money that's already accounted for. And I don't think we always see that. I think one of the graduates told me they really enjoyed seeing the pie chart, and I don't think we really get to even see the pie chart very often. So I think something like that for future discussions, for the staff that's here, for those who might still be up here come next goal setting, that might be some good approaches for us to also approach these bigger conversations a little better too.
Yeah, my hope for you all long-term is that ultimately you end up with a strategic plan that ties very specifically to your budget, that is then includes a series of metrics that you can kind of measure and adjust those priorities as you go, because that's going to provide the data and the information for you to have these types of give and take conversations about, well, maybe this needs to be the priority versus this and what have you. But without that structure and without that data, it's very hard to have informed conversations.
Absolutely. Any other comments on this? Go ahead, Tim.
Just because I don't think anybody commented on the succession ready after
Oh, yeah, that's
Nate
given.
mentioned it on there, but to me, like what we're experiencing right now shows that, I already believed that it was true, but we're all replaceable. And yeah, it can hurt and it can be emotional and whatever else when somebody leaves, whatever causes somebody to leave or they get hit by a bus or whatever it's going to be. But if we want to build for tomorrow and we want to be leaders, et cetera, we have to be looking both inside and outside for new department heads. And so, yes, there might be opportunities for succession and to draw from within, and that's fantastic, but I don't know that we have to be ready to do that. There'll be awkward times, and we'll bring in outside assistance as we need it to get through those awkward times, and we'll get going again.
Well, just, oh, go ahead. I was
You
just
wanna
going to
go
say, as a
first?
commissioner up here as well, I read succession planning is slightly different. That as well, but also in business, it can also mean that you're going to know the person's retiring, let's say, a year in advance. So you start your search 8 months in advance. So the new person starts 6 months in advance, and you have that person shadow that other person. It might be somebody in the department, it might be somebody out of the department. So I think succession planning has dual meaning in this case. So I think that's a good point to have raised, Tim, to me at least. Are we on, both on track, or one of us?
Well,
off?
you said one of the things I was going to say. I agree with that, especially there are critical positions where if you can have some overlap, some knowledge transfer. It's not that you're necessarily looking to transfer styles or biases or anything like that, but just sometimes there's very complex history that we need to transition. But another piece that people can get uncomfortable with that's part of succession planning is, creating your SOPs and documenting standards of operating procedures, standard operating procedures, and other historical facts, so that when you don't have that ability to do overlap, you have some of that. But the one thing I would just keep the city commission in mind when you're thinking about city, succession planning, don't just be thinking of your folks at the top. I think a perfect example is, let's use our streets person, our streets supervisor. A lot of times, some of your best folks, and I'm not going to do Frank's job for him, but you want to be identifying your crew people that could potentially someday be a foreman or a potential street supervisor, and identifying that interest early on and making sure they have access if they want the ability to train and be ready to compete for that job or to get that job. That's another piece of it too. So, when I'm talking about succession planning, I'm not talking about just the top, but I'm also talking about our frontline folks as well.
Is in police and fire, we have a pretty robust chain of command and opportunities to train within, but I don't necessarily feel that we have that across a lot of our other departments.
Yeah, and I hate the phrase human capital. It's become very big in business lately, and it makes my skin crawl. However, it is a way to look at things of investing in who you have in your organization is just as important. And to Tim's point, not everything's a given, not everything is, we know who's lined up for the next 20 years, but there should be some making sure that our own people qualify by our own standards because we invest in our staff that much.
And yes, there is a chance that we can invest in staff and promote or try to give, say, somebody an opportunity for advancement and initial training, and then they decide to take a job elsewhere. But hopefully, well, one, we're creating a better workforce for all departments.
Well, and that's where.
But
sorry.
then hopefully we can create a welcoming job environment here that when that person is next looking to step up or transition to a different job, they'll have Traverse City on the radar yet again. As a specific example,
Oh.
we had a good, a person that I felt was a very good planning assistant who has transitioned now to being the village manager of the village of Kingsley. And we do have, say, an assistant city manager position. If she decided that Traverse City is a good place, then that could be an opportunity for her to come back. And the fact that we invested some time and effort in training to get somebody that was a college student or fresh out of college to be somebody that Kingsley is now benefiting from doesn't mean that we won't benefit from in further down the line.
Agreed, but I don't think it has to be a long-term payout
No.
of boomeranging. I think
No.
investing in general is good.
Yeah,
Well,
that's my whole point.
And if I could, I want to take the opening that Commissioner Treadwell just gave me. You know, the other thing that I didn't mention here, but when you're thinking about total compensation, there's another factor that goes in there that does not have a financial quantity, and that's the organization's culture. And the culture of the staff's culture is one thing, but don't ever underestimate the culture of the appointed and elected officials as well that plays into that. And ultimately, if we can get everybody to on a relatively same page as far as what our culture is here when it comes to our employees, as it comes to our citizens, as it comes to, you know, how we interact and treat each other, that's a whole nother piece that plays into your ability to attract and retain individuals, top and at the front line.
All right, any final comments on this topic? All right, what I'm going to do is open up for general public comment, but given the composite of our room right now, I think that will leave plenty of room for people who wanted to maybe comment on this ACT discussion or just anything in general. So we'll open up for public comment. Feel free to comment on anything you would like, including the topic at hand. Oh, there we go.
Holly Cairns, City Assessor.
Art Krieger, Director of Municipal Utilities.
We wanted to thank you. We volunteered and designated as the ACT group spokespeople.
Wonderful.
So we appreciate this discussion tonight. You know, seeing the study, of course, no one's had a lot of time with it yet. And I appreciate the discussion about succession, because I'm kind of in that boat as well, and with the loss of my deputy right now. They're all in different places, but we just want to thank you for considering that and working forward with us on us, because we do value what we do here at the City of Traverse City, and want to retain that for the commissioners, the people we work for, our clients. We want to keep that up, and there is a lot of work to do all the time. It never seems to get less. And the list of priorities, I would like to cut a lot of those down, but I'm not sure that there's any I can cut off yet, but I'll look at that.
I'll just add, we appreciate the discussion tonight, and we do have some ACT members here, staff members, as Commissioner Colbert mentioned, and others viewing virtually as well. So these decisions are important to us as your staff, and we're excited to continue the conversation, as Polly mentioned as well. Thanks.
Then go ahead.
Do I have to state my name and address?
No, that's okay.
All right, my name's Colleen Pavelio. I do serve as a communications specialist for the City of Traverse City. And I did come late. My son had a baseball game. If you're a parent of a Legion baseball kid, it's playoff week.
Congratulations.
I just saw the analysis today. I thank you all for your conversation tonight and that you do believe in your staff. I did look at the analysis and would like to see it a little more comprehensive. In comparison, I'll just put out my position. I wasn't compared to even positions. Some of the positions were not even comparable to what my position is. And so I don't know if that's across the board, but looking at job descriptions is very important. And then also I did want to bring up to Nate's point that he had the realities of key roles and mentioned that some have already seen rapid adjustments. And we have current employees, this recommendation is that we are within range. And so do we want to wait until we have exits to see rapid adjustments, or do we want to take care of our employees? This is very uncomfortable for me. I never imagined getting up in front of the commission and also the general public to talk about compensation. So I'm sorry. Normally I'm not so nervous talking to you all, but this is uncomfortable. It is very emotional. We all love working for the city and we want to be taken care of. And so we really do want a comprehensive analysis given to you and for all of you to really review that. And I know that you're looking at, I believe it was the steps next week. So I hope that you do take into consideration that you're looking at rapid adjustments for the roles that are vacant right now. But please look at us that we all love our jobs. We love to work for all of you. And we love to work for the people of the city, and that we want to be fairly taken care of as well. So, thank you.
Steve Ball, City Fire Department. Appreciate the conversation. I think it's a great conversation. I agree with all the comments. I will just reiterate one thing. Commissioner Colbert had mentioned the recruiting. I do head the recruiting effort with Traverse City Fire, and it is a challenge. And you know, most of it is because of the pay structure. We are part of the collective bargaining unit, but that doesn't mean that we are you know, where we need to be, especially in this area. So I know this is about the ACT, and they certainly deserve a look as well, but I would consider ourselves and our police friends here too, because that's something that across the board definitely needs to be looked at. It is a true challenge.
I don't want to rush anybody because I know for some of you this is, as Colleen mentioned, speaking about your job in front of us, but if does anybody else want to speak, please feel free to approach. Okay, well, first I just wanted to say thank you to Polly and Art. I wasn't sure, didn't realize that we'd have representatives. I would have invited you up as part of the discussion, but I appreciated your comments. And Colleen, for getting up and speaking. I appreciate that, you know, we do hear from fire and police via unions. When there's debates and discussions during budgeting, we often hear from the unions, and there's not meaning that that's perfect either, those relationships, but I know the ACT specifically is non-union, and so I appreciate you all being willing to come up to talk to us about this, to help us understand better. I hope we're having a conversation that continues. I think a lot of us have pointed out some of these other questions that we'd like to see addressed, so I guess in my thoughts going forward, and I'll ask others too, to the point that was made, I think the steps are the first step, no pun intended, or whatever that would be. But that's something we can do immediately. But I think there's a lot of questions that we are all looking for answers to as well. So I would just put out there to those here in our audience and those watching at home, as was mentioned, that I don't think any of us see this as we'll vote on the 7th and call it done. I think this is a much bigger conversation that'll have a lot more layers looked at. But hopefully at least this first step can get some movement for you all and get this moving in the right direction. Did anybody else have anything else they want to say? It's good. Okay. And I guess then with that, any final comments from the commissioners? Look at us go. Sorry it wasn't an hour-long meeting tonight, but I think we did a really good job and discussed a lot of
last week.
It's true, shorter than last week. So they gave me this giant gavel, so I'm going to use it. Meeting adjourned.
So good to know. My pointer reaches.
Yeah, I know, right? Where's that set up? Up on the
Yeah, I
podium?
use it over there.
Can we just
Yeah.
set it like on the edge next time or something?
Probably could. Yeah, I just left it and I had my pointer with
Well, I
me,
know when
so.
you've done other people's meetings, people are